Hey guys, it's Horror Free for All, better known as Goosebumps Completionists, and I hope you're doing well tonight. I'm joined by my good friend, the Horrorlander, in this collaborative discussion video we have planned for you all tonight. And if you saw the thumbnail of this video, we're going to be talking about a very touchy subject, but I think it needs to be talked about because this scenario could be happening sooner than later or relatively close from the time we're making this video. So we're going to be looking at the topic of what should the legacy of Goosebumps be once R.L. Stine inevitably retires and or passes away. So before we go any further, I want to give the floor to the Horrorlander. How are you doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It is your boy, the Horrorlander. This is my brother for life. We have been friends for a couple of years now. Been on his channel several times, but it's been a while. It's been a while since me and him have been on the screen talking about a discussion outside of Goose Junkies, our podcast, which all of you guys should still check out. We have a lot of fun there. But yeah, man, this is one of those things that it kind of reminds us of how old we are because, when we were for those of you who were alive during the 90s, you knew about the prime of when Goosebumps was out and kicking and pumping out stuff. You had that break in the Y2K era, you had the return at the end of the Y2K era, and everyone's like, you know what, that day when Stine retires, he gets old, maybe he passes away, it's going to be a while. We still got a lot of time to enjoy kids' horror. Well, it's 2025, people, and the man is, in his early 80s. It's getting close to that time. And as much as I want the guy to live till 110 and, everything to work out all, roses and daisies and stuff, it's not the case. This is the time where we have to start grasping reality that Goosebumps, potentially could not go on forever if we're just tying it to Stine. There might need to be some more routes in the future taken. What are those routes? That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we discuss possible routes because I think me and you, more immersed in kids horror as a genre than majority of people probably watching out there. I know there's a good amount of people who read all the knockoff series from the 90s, who read the Goosebumps inspired homage series these days, who keep up with the genre, who go back to the heyday of the golden age with Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps in the 90s and have stuck with the genre for a long time. You're probably unicorns out there in the community, but you are out there. There's a lot of new folks that came in on the wave of the Goosebumps movies, or maybe the Horrorland books, or maybe even Series 2000 in the late 90s. Um, that's the different time frames within the Goosebumps lifespan that we're working with. Some people even hopped on during the reprint era of the books in the early 2000s when there was no new content and just reruns and reprints. So if you're out there, I see you too. So it brings the question, right? And I think this is going to be the dividing point in the beginning of the video that might make you click off before we go any further. Is R.L. Stine mutually exclusive to Goosebumps? Historically, debatable. There's some evidence out there that suggests that once upon a time, back in the 90s, when R.L. Stine was pinning and putting his name on the covers of different book series across different publishers, when you do the math, at one point he was doing 4 to 5 books a month on release. It begged the question, was Stine actually writing all these books? Well, it came to surface that there has been evidence across pretty much all the series that Stine has ever put his name on in the 90s that there was ghostwriting help, even Goosebumps. But that's more underground knowledge. You have to be really involved with the Goosebumps lore and fandom to really know that. This is deeper iceberg stuff, not the surface level. But that stuff is there with series like Give Yourself Goosebumps and Tales to Give You Goosebumps. And some of those stories are pretty revered in the fandom that know about them. And given that if those stories possibly or indeed in fact are ghost written, there is the possibility that other stories from those series were also ghost written, which means that some episodes in the 90s show possibly never even originated from R.L. Stine. So if you open yourself up to that possibility, if you open yourself up to the idea or the fact, when you look at the 90s show, there's a lot of in name only adaptations, completely different takes on source material that most fans appreciate more than R.L. Stine's original work. It brings the question like, can Goosebumps succeed without R.L. Stine? And I'm going to say this to play devil's advocate for all you out there that might be doubting that Goosebumps could continue without R.L. Stine. I see your point in that he is the face of the franchise. He was there at the genesis of it. He was the granddaddy of kids horror. He popularized it. He made Goosebumps the juggernaut like it was in the 90s. He's had his likeness and name attached to it since day one. So if he up and just decided to retire, or maybe he suddenly passes away, anything that comes after it isn't going to be from him. So you're going to miss out on that charm. I get you to a degree. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're talking about if Goosebumps could continue Stine's legacy without him being in the picture. We're talking about Stine's legacy, not his work, right? And in that, I would say that you should hear what we have to say. Because if you hear what we have to say, you might change your mind and might warm up to the idea that Stine's legacy can continue on. Because if you ask me, and I think Horrorlander will agree with me on this, I think Goosebumps could succeed. And in actuality, if Stine were to retire or suddenly pass away, let's say tomorrow, I think that there's going to be a flood of interest coming back into the IP inherently just from that alone. And people are going to start finding the moderns that they never have touched in the modern years. I'm talking about the people who grew up with the 90s books, Series 2000, and the old stuff, and have only ever read the old stuff. They're going to come rediscover the modern Goosebumps books. And you're going to start seeing people trying to conduct revisionist history about the opinions of moderns. And it's going to drive up sales, it's going to drive up interest. Scholastic's going to notice that, and inevitably it's going to happen, anyways. So I guess we should start off with the conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Horrorlander. If this scenario happened, let's say soon, not necessarily tomorrow, but soon, what do you think? Like, I guess to begin your point of view on this, would be the point of contention for the changing of hands, or I guess the changing of guard from Goosebumps being solely R.L. Stine driven to possibly being the work of a new hired on writer or chosen writer by R.L. Stine, even to carry the torch, or maybe it's passed down to them if Stine passes away, or maybe a collective. What avenue do you think would be a good place to start to get people to warm up to this hypothetical idea?
Well, I think that my avenue, which I think is preferred, has been done before, and I would argue it's been done successfully in three distinct examples. First of them is the Ghost of Fear Street, which was a series that had R.L. Stine's name attached to it, but it was openly said that everything is, of course, ghost written, but it's not ghost written because the authors' names are on there. You see that a bunch of different people are contributing to the books, and although Ghost of Fear Street was not as popular as Goosebumps, of course, it almost had a TV show. There was a pilot episode, so it was in the works of maybe replacing Goosebumps. The series had a lot of book entries in it. If you look at Spine Tinglers was quite the successful Goosebumps knockoff in the sense that it didn't end at four books. It had quite a bit of books in there, and all of them are different authors and creators. Now, the pen name is Empty Coffin, but inside, when you actually look at the book, it's all different people who are contributing to stories. And you got some really good ones in there. And a lot of them, quite a few of them, have even type of Goosebumps aspects to them. So, hence the Goosebumps knockoff, trying to build off that hype. And then you have The Haunting Hour, which is the famous TV show, which is called R.L. Stine's Haunting Hour. And he had zero involvement with the show. And that show is considered to be, by a lot of people, even nowadays, one of the best kids' horror media ever. It's considered to be widely loved. It's considered to be even better than Goosebumps on average by quite a few reviewers and people. And you even see that the new Pumpkinhead movie has the same Haunting Hour production crew coming back and directing the movie. So there has been examples that people can step into a kids horror franchise and pass it between hands. As long as the hands are talented, have the credentials, know what the general vibe is supposed to be of the series, it ends up doing pretty good. So I think that if R.L. Stine were to retire or pass away, there are quite a few kids horror authors and talent out there, whether it be the on-screen people, whether it be book people. There's plenty of people that you can say, hey, we know that you're passionate about kids horror. We've, read into some of your work. You are quite talented, but obviously Goosebumps has a lot more pull, can bring in a lot of sales and attention. We want to highlight your talents. We want to put the spotlight on you guys, and at the same time, you're honoring the work of R.L. Stine. You're honoring the IP because you're keeping it going with brand new, fresh stories that still feel like the IP. So it's not going to be, a Goosebumps Disney Plus situation where, they go, hey, we don't care about the IP, we're going to do something new. No, you have to honor the IP, but you bring your own fresh takes. There's plenty of people who can do that. Neil Shusterman, for example, who I think we'll talk about in quite a bit, um, he worked on the OG Goosebumps TV show. He wrote episodes like Night of the Living Dummy 3 and Werewolf of Fever Swamp, which are quite different to the book counterparts, but they're widely loved. He worked on The Haunting Hour with an episode called Catching Cold and Pool Shark. So he's had some kids' horror pull there. And he has a couple of kids' horror books, such as Darkness Creeping. I know he has some short story collection called Mindquakes and stuff. So he's been in the game. He's quite talented. He's quite versatile. He knows how Goosebumps works. You can approach him and say, "Hey, man, we want you to write some Goosebumps books. You know the vibe. You've worked with us before. In terms of just IP work, you'd be a good pick. You have Goosebumps knockoff authors that are modern, such as J.H. Reynolds, R.H. Grimley, A.D. Arrow, who have their series Frightland, which got discontinued unfortunately. Monster Street, Bumps in the Night. Those guys have openly said, hey, we're fans of R.L. Stine. We write our books to kind of homage Goosebumps. You can say, hey guys, instead of just homaging Goosebumps and going to smaller sellers or self publishing, we'll take on your work. We'll do the marketing, we'll do the promotion, we'll do the printing, but we want to adopt your stories so you can feel like you're a part of Stine's legacy. So there's plenty of options out there. And there's plenty of people who I think are fans, are talented, and can continue the book series. And I think one avenue would be for me, just for me, if we were to make a TV show, right? Let's say a new Goosebumps TV show is coming out. There was something that happened in the past where, George Romero was going to make a Dead House adaptation movie. It never came to be, but let's say in a parallel timeline, it did come to be. And let's say that movie turned out really good. You would have seen a famous horror director essentially take a Goosebumps story and throw his own spin on it, do his own take on it, and it would have been good. Then people would have been like, "Hey George, we want you to come back and make more movies." So you could have creators take Goosebumps stories that already exist and then say, "Hey, put your own spin on it and make it into an episode." That way, all you guys out there could see them take a story that you love and make something that's just as good, maybe even better if you're open minded. And then you'd be like, you know what? I trust this guy to continue making new Goosebumps stories because he's proved himself. And that'll take away the doubt that people had, like when the Goosebumps Disney Plus show came out, where a lot of it is new talent. So when you have new people that you've never heard of, they're very obscure. You're like, I don't know anything about the dude. He hasn't proved himself. He's just being thrown into the ring. How am I supposed to trust him? Well, if you give him a testing period, if you show them that, hey, I got the chops for it, then you can put your money into them. And I think Scholastic would do that. I think there's plenty of productions who would do that. And I think fans should do that because R.L. Stine, I grew up with him. I love the guy. He's extremely talented. He's by no means the end all be all. Okay, if you've experienced enough kids horror out there, if you've seen movies, TV shows, books, you know that it's not that Goosebumps is the only good one out there. It's just the most popular. There's always going to be other people who are talented and wanting a shot at it. So why not give it a shot? Why not continue it? And Stein himself would probably say yeah, because have you seen when people adapt Stein's work on the big screen? He usually is the first one promoting it. He said, "Hey guys, like Pumpkinhead. There's a new movie coming out. They took my story, they threw their own spin on it, they made it scarier." He said it in interviews. So I feel like if Stine is willing to pass the torch, Why should fans then gatekeep that torch when that torch could not only keep Stine's IP running for our kids, our grandkids' kids, um, and also giving new people a chance to basically become popular instead of selling like 100 copies and then having to stop chasing their dreams all because they couldn't market themselves enough like Scholastic. So that's my take. I know you got a similar take with your own variations, so I want you to take the floor.
Yeah, I'm glad that you addressed all of that in your introduction because to kind of build on what you were saying, um, when we say that Goosebumps is probably the most popular kids horror IP, we really mean it, and I don't think a lot of people take this into account. But I think some of you out there need to hear what I'm about to say. Goosebumps is kids horror. It's the face of it. It always has been. Next to Are You Afraid of the Dark? Are You Afraid of the Dark has disappeared. You know, this hypothetical war that I speculated was going to happen never did happen. It's faded into obscurity. It's fallen into a recession. Goosebumps is kind of in a recession in itself, but it's literally the most prolific and pronounced IP you see on bookshelves till this day. You go to a Books a Million and Barnes and Noble, they have almost an entire shelf dedicated to R.L. Stine, and then most of it is Goosebumps books, whether it be reprints or some of the moderns they have in stock. I mean, the guy is still selling millions of copies because some modern Goosebumps books are pushing 40, like 40th printings, pushing it. So there's no shortage of demand for these books, right? Now, some people might say, well, it's the power of R.L. Stine. Well, if that was the case, then why doesn't Shark Knight and Slime Doesn't Pay have already 15 printings, right? Or the Garbage Pail Kids books have 18 or 20 by now,
Or
you know?
Stein Tinglers.
Or Stein Tinglers being actually available in a lot of these bookstores. You can't even find the new Spine Tinglers hardly in a lot of them, right? A lot of them you find in like discount places. I went to an Ollie's bargain outlet recently and saw a bunch of Stein Tinglers 2 unsold hardcovers just littering an entire shelf. I don't think Stein has the power, y'all. I don't think it's Stein. I think it's the brand of Goosebumps. And I'm willing to put my money with where my mouth is when I say this. I If you took Goosebumps off the table, I think kids horror in terms of mainstream would die. The mainstream interest that is there, I would say about 80% of modern kids or even people still reading kids horror today mainly get into it or come back into it because of Goosebumps. Without that intrigue, without that mainstream staying power, what do you have left? All you have left is unsold copies of books littering your shelves. You might still have some reprints, going into circulation, but eventually interest will die down and people will stop caring. But Goosebumps is kids horror. Kids horror, as niche as it already is, I don't believe that there's going to be the next Goosebumps to happen. Word of mouth doesn't work the way it used to pre-internet back in the 90s, right? Internet, today's kids, which are already desensitized to, I think, we read modern Goosebumps. They're probably desensitized to this stuff already. If that doesn't already hurt the reputation of Goosebumps, then that should tell you that I don't think a new series, even if it was pushing the envelope, could ever top the magnitude in pop culture that Goosebumps has become and how synonymous it is with the genre. Without it, there would be no kids horror. So the reason why we are stressing that Goosebumps becomes the monolith of kids horror and becomes the inviting ground for these creators to come collaborate in and actually give them the floor to contribute is because Goosebumps is going to sell itself. I think with time there is ways to do it to help that transition from Stein to possibly just a new creator or sole creator or maybe a collaborative. There are ways to structure it that I think could be easier, and I think BD started off beautifully with a TV show. I might add on to that in a minute. But aside from that, I still think people are going to be interested in reading it, whether they're going into it to hate read or what. You're still going to be serving the purpose of Scholastic. You're going to be blindly buying the books. You're going to be reading them, whether you think that it can touch Stine's torch or not. They're going to be sellers. They're going to be selling, right? Now the reputation and whatnot, we can deliberate on that all day long. That doesn't change the fact that it's going to be a success. I genuinely believe that, and I will put my stamp of approval on that. So, which it brings me to the second thing that you brought up was the TV show. I have to 100% agree. The TV show idea, in my opinion, is the best way to introduce this up front. Let's say if Stine retires in a month, the Goosebumps books cease to produce, give it a little bit, and then announce a TV show. Be upfront that Stine's not really involved. He's just like, I guess, like an advisor, and we're going the haunting hour approach. Maybe we get like directors like Guillermo del Toro, Zach Kreger, Andre Overdahl coming in to offer some directing chops for some episodes that they think are iconic. Maybe you get some prolific writers coming in to offer new takes on older books. Maybe they're contributing their own news stories in the mix along with R.L. Stine adaptations. People are probably going to be stoked for this for two reasons. One, we're in a content drought right now in kids horror, period. Even with the knockoffs coming out still, or I guess the Goosebumps inspired series, as if you want to be proper about it, they're only putting out a book or two a year themselves. So I mean, like, if you add them all up, even Are You Afraid of the Dark's coming out with one book a year. I mean, you're probably getting collective of 6 or 7 books a year that have some sort of brand recognition or has some appeal to Goosebumps. Why not just give them to Scholastic and have them put it into Goosebumps, and they can be releasing 7 to 8 Goosebumps books a year? That should be beneficial for them. That should be dollar signs waiting for them to collect on, right? It just makes sense. But in order to get to that point, you have to start with a TV show to introduce people that idea. So I think a TV show is mainstream enough, it's casual enough to capture the casual audience, and if it's a hit, then start putting out novelizations of those episodes with those writers, with those creators involved. And if those are a success, and you start to see that people genuinely are responding to the TV show, and you see that reprints are selling out because of all these R.L. Stine fans coming to moderns or maybe the reprints again and rediscovering the books, then put out a new series with the collective, then put out a series with the new writers, and show people like, hey, look, Stein's not here, but it's still Goosebumps. We're still honoring the spirit of Stein, but it's just not him writing it. And I think when people disassociate the series from that, it's going to click. Look, I was the first person when I heard that Creepshow, the TV series, getting announced, didn't have George Romero involved because he was dead at the time. I was like, this could be a failure because George Romero would understand Creepshow. And the last time some people tried it without him, it was Creepshow 3. So I had reason to be feeling like where we're going to get burned. But then once I learned that Greg Nicotero and people that were associated with the franchise that knew and understood Romero's vision and love and passion for the franchise and wanted to honor him and the series and the fans all in one, that convinced me that I'm going to give this series a fair shot. And I loved it. And it had nothing to do with Romero. Stephen King was also the big collaborator of the original movie. He literally took a paycheck and he's like, I don't need to be involved with this. I'm just going to contribute some stories. And he took a paycheck. That could be R.L. Stine if he chose the retirement route. He could just choose to collect a paycheck. Because in a recent interview where he was talking about the most recently announced House of Shivers book, he was asked, why do you still do this? He goes, money. He was being upfront. He just does it for the money. If he's getting free money without having to do the work anymore, fine. He can go write his Steintingler stories. He can go write his new adult novel that he's writing in 2026. He can go write Graveyard Club, his comic stories that he obviously seems to be more passionate about these days than Goosebumps, to be quite frank, and let Goosebumps thrive with that brand recognition with people who are hungry, who want to make a name for themselves, that want to prove what they got, and they are passionate about the subgenre in Goosebumps inherently and what Stine began, and they want to continue it and honor it and possibly evolve it and bring something new to the table that modern audiences I think are craving. So you have to give it a chance, right? So yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg, y'all. We can keep going with this discussion because I think this kind of blends into books and whatnot, which I'm gonna pass back over to Horrorlander. So we talked about like a TV show. We talked about examples like Haunting Hour, um, and various other shows that were a collaborative effort. What do you think could be the best outcome that can come out of, a hypothetical Goosebumps collaborative effort, or maybe even just one solo guy taking over the torch completely? What do you think would be the best avenue?
I mean, the best thing that can come from either. So, if we take the idea that Goosebumps is going to be adopting a lot of brand new writers, in terms of brand new writers, in the sense that these are people who already have published stuff, but they haven't been able to get off the shelves, so now they have an avenue to get off shelves. You are going to build a lot of excitement, not just for fans who are consuming content, but think about it, guys. You're going to be building a lot of excitement for creatives in the industry because think about it. When George Romero decided that he wanted to do Goosebumps, it was because he knew about the books that were coming out. And I think he said that he read them to his kid. You know, he knew about them and he's like, hey, this is a cool thing. I love the fact that it's so popular. You know, I want to throw my hat into the ring. Well, let's say if theoretically he did throw his hat into the ring, everything played out, he got involved. Well, George Romero is friends with some other popular horror creatives, writers, directors. So them seeing their colleague is going to be like, hey, you know what? We also want to take a shot at it because we saw that one of our peers did it and he did a great job. And I have some ideas, so I want to do it. And then let's say if they get all these writers and authors and new people in there, you're going to have a lot of people who are like, hey guys, let's keep feeding into it. Let's keep building into it. What happens when it becomes too big? Now we're going to start doing spin offs. Now we're going to start branching out. We're going to do all different types of layers and stuff. Hey, it doesn't just need to be books and a TV show. You got a Goosebumps comic series that's going to be coming out. You're going to be having a lot of cool new stuff. And I think that even when I've talked about like kids' horror knockoffs, I'll give one example, which is some books that I have over here. So, Weird House Press, they're an underground publishing horror company. They publish a lot of horror books. They do a lot of weird fiction. And last year, they tried something new because they do all adult horror. And they said, hey, we're going to make some books that are kids' horror books that parents and kids can both read and enjoy if you're a horror fan. So they came out with 3 books. I have 2 of them here. And these books did not promote themselves as Goosebumps knockoffs. Sorry for the glare. But these books were essentially just saying, hey, we're going to be making kids' horror books that are darker, that are scarier than maybe what Scholastic and Blackstone and those guys are publishing. So they came out with these. These have no reviews, okay? These have no reviews on Goodreads. They don't have any attention because it was an underground publisher. Imagine if you stamped Goosebumps on these. Well, now they're going to be known to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of readers. And now all of a sudden, these 2 authors have spotlight. And then people who are fans of Goosebumps will see that, hey, you know what? We can actually go darker. We can actually go crazier. We can actually, not do what is limited to Stine because Stine's a great guy, but he's one mind. One mind is going to be used to what he's always been doing. But when you got dozens of minds involved, people start building off each other, people start getting motivated off each other. You're going to have a lot of variety. You're going to have a lot of excitement and all this stuff going on. And that's what you want out of a franchise. You know, and it's going to happen, one way or another, right? Let's be honest. Like, if you look at the Halloween franchise, the slasher movie, did it end with John Carpenter? No. It extended, it got passed between people. People wanted a shot at it. So if Goosebumps is inevitably going to be passed off maybe down the line, why not be inviting towards it? Why not welcome it with open hands and be like, hey guys, don't worry about this being like something that has to be brought years down the line. We're going to encourage it now because then it's going to be fun. We're going to all enjoy it. People are going to be excited and get creative with it. And kids horror is not going to die, and that's like the main thing. So I think that's the avenue you do. If you need to pick one person, honest to God, I think that you'll bring this person up. You have to bring somebody who in the past has worked with Goosebumps and people love what they did. So immediately who comes up to me is 3 names. And this is just saying TV show, books in general. If you're like, hey, we're not going to make it an open market, Neil Shusterman, Dan Angel, Billy Brown. These guys, if you pair them up together, I think that they will cook up a lot of stuff. So if all of you guys out there are like, hey, you got, some recommendations on authors and writers and stuff. We don't know if we can trust you. Well, you trusted these three. You loved the 90s TV show. You loved what these guys pumped out in The Haunting Hour. So you know you can trust these guys. R.L. Stine knows he can trust these guys. He's probably, interacted with these three before. Most definitely. So why not pass the torch to them? And if you want to make like a happy marriage, you can have the new IP led by these three, whether it be a TV show, whether it be a books, and then have them kind of, as like the main conductors of the train. They got all the passengers boarding. They're like, hey guys, start pitching in your ideas in books, and don't feel too much pressure. Don't feel like you guys have to come up with a hit because we're going to be pumping out several hits. We're going to be pumping out several of our stories. So we're going to be the spinal cord, and you can just build off of that. So that's my idea for like if you have to pass the torch to a couple people, if you have to pass the torch to everybody. And I think that that's the best way to do it, man. And I know that you are going to probably go deeper into Neil Shusterman because, he's such a talented dude and he's got so many credentials that it's natural that they go to people like that.
I'm glad I'm glad you brought up Neil Shusterman in that because honestly, if I had faith in one person. Now, when I say that I have the most faith in Neil Shusterman, I really do mean it. Not a lot of people know this, but he is one of the founding fathers of the golden era of kids horror. He was right next to DJ McHale and Are You Afraid of the Dark and R.L. Stine and Goosebumps putting out kids horror content in the early 90s. The problem was that he was going up against Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, which just had insane pop culture exposure. Him as a writer, he was putting out short story collections. He was contributing to stuff like, he had Bruce Coville's Spine Book of Spine Tinglers, Book of Monsters, stuff like that. He's putting out his own short story collections, but he never hit the success that those two franchises did. So he joined Goosebumps to become a television show writer, so that way he can at least contribute to the genre in other ways, right? And I think he admitted that Goosebumps became what it did, and he joined the conglomerate. He was willing to contribute to something that he didn't create, but he saw the passion and the vision behind. Maybe he did it for work. Who knows? I don't really care. Proof is in the pudding. He came back for Haunting Hour, right? If you don't know Neil Shusterman's work outside of like Darkness Creeping or anything, you might recognize his award-winning series across the young adult literature. You can literally go to a Barnes and Noble right now, and I guarantee you go to the S's. There's more Neil Shusterman books there than R.L. Stine young adult books. He has written the Scythe series, the Downsiders series. Uh, he's written a bunch of standalone young adult novels that he wrote back in the 90s that are still in print, still selling thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. The guy's a literary genius. And if you have never read his kids' horror stuff, he has an eye for just weird ideas. He's not quite R.L. Stine in terms of the goofy humor, but he's out there with the OG 62 R.L. Stine mindset of trying to be creative with some monsters or creative in that Twilight Zone existential way for kids. But he's always willing to push that envelope just a little bit. Now, inherently, I kind of prefer Neil Shusterman's style over R.L. Stine, even though I am the Goosebumps completionist. I love R.L. Stine. I've grew up with his stuff. I'll be the first to admit that Shusterman has some qualities that Stine just doesn't have, and Stine has some qualities that Shusterman just doesn't have. Right? So it goes hand in hand. Is there going to be a perfect R.L. Stine fit replacement? No, unless you're actively trying to AI generate his prowess or his voice in literature. I don't think anybody's going to be able to do it, right? You're going to have all these imitators try and try and try, but the most authentic ones, the ones that write true to themselves, they speak louder to me than people trying to imitate. And I think Susterman's voice is just as well put together as Stine's in his literary form. So if there was going to be one person to take over, Neil Shusterman should be the first person they call. Stein should be like, "Hey, Neil, I love your work. I love what you did in the '90s show. I, I love what you're doing out there with your own stuff. I'd be honored if you take over Goosebumps so I can retire." I think Shusterman would do it. if the money was right, of course, because he is being handed over a task to carry on the franchise on his back. Um, if that's not enticing enough, maybe he could be like the editor or the main guy in a collective collab. I'm glad that you brought up some modern writers doing their thing that fell victim to the four book curse. And if you don't know what that is, basically like these guys that would come out with these series and they'd find a publisher to take a chance on them, but the publisher will sign them to a 4 book contract because that's the most common one you get these days. You get 4 books, and if they don't sell this amount of copies, then they're not going to renegotiate your contract after that. And sadly, that's what happens. Even like self-published Amazon publishers out there, right? The guys grinding out there, um, trying to put out kids horror stuff. I mean, you see that there too. So um, maybe if he's like the head, and you got some of these guys coming in, or maybe even you can go like Scholastic could take in. You submit some treatments, or they'll do some like I don't know, vetting themselves. They'll find a writer that they like. Maybe I think they still have Mike Ford writing for them at the moment. He's doing standalone Mary Downing Hahn esque books. He wrote a couple books for Spine Tinglers. He wrote a series called Frightville himself. Maybe ask Mike Ford if he wants to pitch in a book. Go in house. Maybe ask Christopher Croverton, who writes kids horror books, standalone stuff, to write his own stuff. The sky's the limit with that. But you start with that, and you work to maybe getting bigger names like wishful thinking, Joe Lansdale, Joe Hill. You can work to that, but it depends on how you go about making Goosebumps an invitation for this, right? I don't think Joe Hill or Joe Lansdale, those guys are very prolific horror writers, would come into Goosebumps with with the apprehension, knowing that people aren't receptive to them coming into it. It would have to be an invitation, and I'm glad that you brought that up too.
Well, I
Um,
was gonna build off that too. Is like
yeah,
you brought up that invitation. Like if you make it inviting, people will come in. One of the examples, like I brought up with Weird House, they came out with those 3 books, and I made a video, not too long ago, which was that I wanted adult horror authors to start doing kids horror, and me and completionists have seen that a lot of people have been doing that. People have been stepping in and trying to do that. There is a book, a kids horror book that's coming out, I think by the end of this year or maybe beginning of next year, by Tim Wagner, who is an adult horror author. And the book is supposed to be like a Why I Hate Jack Frost mixed with Catching Cold, called I Scream, You Scream. He is doing that because he wants to continue kids horror on Weird House Press. And I've been pitching the idea that, oh, Tim Wagner, he's friends with some of my favorite authors like Tim Curran and other people. If they see that their peer is going and transitioning to kids horror, they may be like, I want to do it. I respect him as my friend. I want to also join in. Imagine that, but it's not this underground publisher, it's Goosebumps. That's what I mean by potential. Imagine if Goosebumps, who I can bet you that guys like Tim Wagner and Tim Curran, their kids are in their 20s or 30s, if I can recall. They grew up reading these books. They probably knew about them when they were adults and stuff. You know how honored they would be if Scholastic came up to them and said, "Hey, we recognize you. We know you're talented in this field. You have these ideas. Come, bring them over to us. You'll get a lot more promotion and a lot more money and a lot more, growth potential with our corporation and our brands. And we're not going to take away from your idea. You just pitch your idea on our platform." People are going to be like, "Holy shit, this is a golden goose. I'm going to get in there." It's not going to be that, slow apprehension, me praying to the gods. No, they're going to be jumping. They're going to be jumping at the opportunity. And Scholastic will see dollar signs. They will see dollar signs at the fact that everybody wants a piece of Goosebumps. So it's almost like the perfect partnership if you think about
yeah, and you also brought up comics in the equation, right? If you make it inviting, not only do you make it inviting on the literature avenue, not only do you make it inviting on the filmmaking side of it, you can cross genres, and we already have Maddie Gonzalez doing Goosebumps graphics adaptations, but maybe you can appeal to comic book writers who love the series, and they're like, hey, look, we do comics. If you're willing to have us, we'll contribute to Goosebumps this way. They can start branching out into different mediums that they just haven't gone down before, and just start standalone issue comics to see if that can work. I'm not talking about the 4 issue, 3 issue miniseries that IDW is doing. No, I'm talking about you get a comic and that's a Goosebumps tale told in one comic,
R.L.
and
Stine
you
just
go to the
pitched a
next.
story in Hello Darkness or Hello Halloween. Imagine Hello Halloween or Hello Darkness being like, hey, we're doing a crossover with Goosebumps. You have a crossover there, like, hey, we're going to do a Goosebumps issue, all kids' horror stories.
Well, that's
When you,
Boom Studios. Boom Studios is, I think, owned by Disney.
there you go.
There you go. If Disney's putting that out, why not let Disney try that? If they can't do the 2023 show, give them a shot at the comic. Worst case scenario is, y'all, with comics, they're kind of in one ear out the other most of the time. It's a drop in the bucket. If a series comes out and it flops, they just get rid of it after a few issues and people forget about it, right? It's not like a TV show where if you mess it up, people are going to remember that, or a book series, like especially if they come in and they bring all these new writers and let's say hypothetically it doesn't work, then people will remember that. Which brings me to, I guess, the conflicting, I guess, opinions out there that could be floating around still. If you've been listening to up to this point, we appreciate you. I guarantee you there's a good amount of you out there that are thinking in your head, well, Goosebumps is going to fail without R.L. Stine because R.L. Stine, you know, he's the reason why these books are a success. Kids go to book conventions to meet him, blah, 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 blah. If you're still on that mindset, right, think back to what I just said, right? It's not going to change that they're going to still try to make money and probably will successfully make money off continuing without Stein. The question is, I'm gonna kind of pass it to you, BD, because I think you kind of agree with me on this and like definitely see this being a thing. My biggest fear with this isn't that it's going to be inferior than R.L. Stein stuff. I think people are going to go into it with a negative mindset and be overly critical on everything new in this hypothetical situation where these new writers, new collaborators coming in to contribute, and people are going to stack unfair, immeasurable criteria onto these new content and harshfully, I should say, just beat it over the head. And I think that phenomenon will happen, and I just want to address it now. Um, how do you think people would combat this? Like if people like this stuff, how do you think people go around trying to answer to these folks?
I mean, here's the thing. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to the whole, I would say, glorification of R.L. Stine, I've always said this. I'm a huge Goosebumps fan. I'm a huge R.L. Stine fan because I grew up with him. And completionist is the same way. But you have to understand that that sentiment, if we're being realistic, is for the adult community, the people who grew up with it, because we have that emotional connection to Stine. Because when I was growing up, I grew up in the Y2K era on reruns, of Goosebumps when there was not new content really coming out until Haunting Hour came in and Goosebumps Horrorland came in and the revival was there. Comp had that as well. Some of you folks were born during the 90s, so you were there when Stine was trying to get his name out there and you saw it successfully work. That's where the connection builds. If you talk about the kids, listen, if there's a 7 or 8 year old, they are meeting R.L. Stine because he's famous, because he's got that clout to him, because his name is on the book. It's not like they have that, emotional end all be all tie with them. Some may do. I can't speak on every kid, but most kids kind of just move on to the next thing, especially because that's what we used to do as kids a lot of the time. And now kids got the internet and all this media just shoved in their face and TikTok brain, they go to the next thing very quickly. So, I can understand the sentiment for diehard Goosebumps fans out there. But let me put this into perspective. Imagine, let me take you back to the days of Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. How would you have felt if the horror genre, just as a whole, was halted because people said you have to only make content like these two. Only Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley have the right to make horror content for people, horror books for people. We would have lost out on this amazing gift to fiction, which is the horror genre that we've had, the movies that we've had, the books and short stories and comics we've had in the horror genre since Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley back in those, Victorian days were dropping their stuff. If people said, no, this is it, this is the end all be all because they loved it, you would have given up so many golden gooses and huge potential. That's the same thing with kids' horror. If you say that it ends at R.L. Stine, well, what about the future? What about all those people out there who could potentially offer something new and something good? And it's not that new people hate Stine. No, a lot of the people that we're talking about grew up with Goosebumps. If they weren't reading it, they knew about it. They were probably reading it to their kids. George Romero again said that, at one point. So I understand that it won't be the same charm wise without Stein, that maybe investment won't be there. But if you love Goosebumps as a whole, if you love kids' horror as a whole, I think your heart will still be wanting new stories to come out there. And I've said this, man, I know people glorify Stein, but Stein doesn't glorify himself. Stein is a very humble guy. And you see that Stein has actively throughout his career kept on promoting other authors. He has never been the type of guy to be like, oh, I'm the end all be all. I'm the only one who can make kids horror. No, when new writers and new producers and new directors come to his IP, he oftentimes gives it over to them and says, hey, man, you do your thing. There's this cool guy out there who's making books. Go check him out. So when the author himself is that open hearted, that in love with the craft, why do we have to gatekeep on his behalf? He's not doing it, and he's the one who this is his baby. So it would be unjust not only to R.L. Stine to pigeonhole him, but the guy himself wants to branch out. The guy himself wants to try new things. Do you know how R.L. Stine would feel if, he's making these books on Blackstone, he's making an adult horror novel, and people say, hey, you're that Goosebumps guy. You can only make Goosebumps. Well, he'd be offended, wouldn't he? So what about the other kids horror authors who are out there? And people go, you can't make kids horror because you're not R.L. Stine. It's offensive to creatives out there. And I know that, no one's stopping you from loving Stein. We all will still love Stein. Even when Stein passes away, every year there's going to be an anniversary, there's going to be homages to him. We are going to continuously go back to his books and revisit them. But let's just let that be like a Rod Serling thing. Like, we enjoy it when it was there. We go back in time to relive it. But the new generation needs to have new stuff. So I feel like all the people out there who want to gatekeep, the gate is going to break eventually. So you might as well be open hearted and you might as well be excited than watching it forcefully happen and going with a critical eye. And let's be real, a lot of you guys out there who are not reading modern books, you take Goosebumps for granted. And I know, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I've had unfortunately more spotlight than I wish I would have with the whole, real fans, not real fans type of debate. I'm not doing that. But for the people out there who don't read the modern books, you're not keeping up with Stein and his legacy like me and Comp are, like all the people out there who are those unicorns are, all the people out there in the, discourse and communities and Instagram who are, actively talking about the modern books. So when Stein dies, is that when you're going to do revisionist history and glorify him? Because I'm telling you right now, if you read the modern books, you'll see that he reuses a lot of the tropes. You'll see that he's kind of losing his passion and flair as the years go on. So let's be realistic. Let's not make something bigger than it needs to be because the name of the Goosebumps will carry on regardless. So that's my take to people out there. Glorification can always be a bad thing. And even if it does happen, just know that people are going to move past that. And
Yeah,
we should welcome it.
yeah. And to add on that, if you're still out there wondering, well, if Goosebumps is the selling point, and if these other writers are talented enough, shouldn't that make another writer's series be able to just take over where Goosebumps left off? Like I said before, name me one, if you're out there, Besides Are You Afraid of the Dark, name me one other kids horror franchise that's not associated with R.L. Stine at all in any way in terms of his name, branding, or his involvement that has hit pop culture relevance to the level of Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark.
And
You
matter of
can't
fact,
name one. You can't name one, and the closest one is probably Creeped Out, right? But even then, Creeped Out lasted 2 seasons on Netflix when it was picked up from a foreign show. Netflix took a chance on it like they took on Black Mirror, and Black Mirror succeeded, but Creeped Out didn't. Why didn't Creeped Out succeed? Shouldn't it have taken off, right? Shouldn't there have been a market for kids horror to take it off? I think there is a market, but the market comes to Goosebumps. Goosebumps literally collects 80% of the available market share of people interested in it. You need that hub. You need that series to be a collective, the collection point for these creators to survive. Because without it, without Goosebumps, these Amazon publishers, these small publishing guys, self-publishing guys trying to make it out there, they would be even more of a niche market than it already is, right? So it's almost kind of like the WWE TNA phenomenon. The reason why TNA is not out of business is because it develops talent outside of WWE. WWE is they're out in the ocean. They're the ocean of wrestling organizations. TNA is one of the very many ponds that you can find throughout the mainland. That's not the ocean. But every once in a while, fishermen will come into the pond and start collecting fish out of there, and they'll treat them like ocean fish as a delicacy, right? The same thing is applied to Goosebumps, right? The same mindset should be involved here. Goosebumps is the ocean. They're coming to the little ponds like your Monster Streets, your Fright Lands, your Bumps in the Night series like that, and they're doing is taking the writer, the talent, and they're bringing it to the ocean. They're bringing it to where everybody's at. You know, it is what it is. It's like going to Orlando and going to some small mom and pop amusement park without going to Universal or Disney, right?
bro, imagine retiring DC and Marvel and then saying a new comic book organization has to take over. Do you know how much
Exactly.
of a huge mountain that is? That is an unbelievable,
That is
unnecessary
an
hurdle.
amazing comparison. Goosebumps is basically a DC or Marvel to the kids horror genre.
Yeah, imagine you retire DC and Marvel both at the same time, and you say, "Hey, now the gauntlet's open. Somebody take over with the new comic book organization." That's like climbing Everest. Like these guys have such a huge legacy and so much weight and so much money and so much pull that it's almost impossible to replicate unless there's like a once in a lifetime miracle. And building on what Com said about name one, kids horror IP not tied to R.L. Stine that did successfully, don't forget about the Y2K era when the whole lawsuit and everything happened and Goosebumps was retired and it came back with Horrorland. In that time frame, was there any kids horror media that came out that blew up to the level of Goosebumps? No. Is there any media that wasn't tied to R.L. Stine that blew up to that level? No. Matter of fact, the only one that I've seen hit pop culture is Monster House, freaking almost 20 years later. 20 years later, like all these years later, is when you see Monster House being talked about now on YouTube and all these memes. When it came out, though, it was not to the same popularity of Goosebumps. It was an underrated movie. So it takes a lot of just all the right factors playing in for something like that to happen. Why make that challenge and take that risk when you can avoid it all and just end up doing the same type of result?
Great point. That is an amazing point. And it just brings me back to the conclusion. I've had this conclusion for years. When I got back into collecting Goosebumps, I'm like, Stein's almost 80 years old. I mean, like, what's going to happen to Goosebumps when he retires or when he inevitably dies? And after seeing what happened with Goosebumps 2023, and the 2 season fiasco there, and seeing the steady and for sure decline of book releasing a year, and the drop in content, and seeing Stein's focuses other places, and seeing that you got these hungry guys trying to grind these self-published book series, and they're fronting their own money when they could be getting paid by Scholastic to contribute to a series that Stine, I think honestly, and like I'm speaking like I act like I know R.L. Stine, and I know that it's gonna probably rub people the wrong way, but I'm saying this as an impassioned fan, as somebody who does read his new stuff, who does keep up with his work. I do personally feel as a fan that Stine does Goosebumps for two reasons. One, he said it before, he just said it recently. I already brought it up. He does it for money. He does it first and foremost for that. And two, it's his baby. It's his legacy. And he's trying to keep that alive because it keeps him relevant. Without Goosebumps, I think people would keep up with R.L. Stine, but I think like if Goosebumps, let's say he ended it 10 years ago, nobody would be that attached to him as they are right now. Because the fact that he's kept it alive, it indirectly for himself and I guess indirectly for us fans. I do think that he has us fans in mind, and I think he would be tickled to death and honored just by what I've been able to see. I've never met the guy, I've never had personal conversations with him, but from what I've gathered about his personality, I think he would be tickled and honored if the series continued after he would retire or pass away. And I think he would probably view it like how George Romero probably would view it if he saw what happened to Creepshow, right? And he was like, I loved Creepshow. That was one of my favorite passion projects, and I'm glad that they paid a lot of respect not only to my legacy but that franchise and that vision that I had. They honored that vision and they kept it alive as long as they could. And that's really all you can ask for uh, when situations arise like this. Rod Serling even probably, like, hey, I'm tickled to death that you kept Twilight Zone, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like think about that too. Like, imagine if like Rod Serling, unfortunately, I think he passed away too young. He should have really, God willing, lived to older age. Would have been a blessing. But imagine if he was like, hypothetically like an old man, or you see in real time what happened with George Romero. Imagine if they were trying to try like new projects or new movies or new things, and then people went up to him and they're like, "Hey, you're the dead guy. Hey, you're the creep show guy. Hey, you're the Twilight Zone guy. Why are you making that? Give us, what you're known for." Then they'll feel like they're obligated to do it. They'll feel like, oh, I want to try new things. I want to branch out. I want to retire. But everyone just, they keep bringing me back. It's like that with Stine. So it's almost like, don't keep Stine caged. Don't keep other authors and creators and creatives caged. Like, let everybody fly. Let everybody do what they want to do. And yeah, I agree with you, bro. I think Stein is just at that age where he's just doing Goosebumps because he has an obligation to. Because you've seen with Stein Tinklers, you've seen with his brand new adult horror book coming out. You saw it when he was making those adult horror comics that were coming out that he was promoting so heavily. So it's just the reality of something. I think, again, it comes down to that glorification. It's like, hey, fans want to glorify Stine, and Stein's just like, dude, I'm a regular guy. I'm a regular creator. I got limits. Other people got dreams. Let's smell the roses.
And just one last thing I want to address. I can't believe I haven't brought this point up. Um, if you're worried out there that an anthology series could impact, a standalone adventure, right? This is not like, let's say, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Stanley's Spider Man. Them passing down the torch to other writers for prolific characters that are reoccurring in different issues or different books, right? Stein's not passing down these characters. He's just giving the floor open to creators to maybe come in with their own franchises. Let's say a creator has a whole different kids horror franchise that they think are just as good as the Night of the Living Dummy series or the Haunted Mass series, and they want to bring that to the table. Or let's say they get permission from R.L. Stine, or maybe they want to honor R.L. Stine by maybe making a legacy, sequel, I guess. You guess that's what you would call it because it's not Stein making it; it's somebody making it in honor of him of one of his books and christening that into the series every once in a while. Like, I don't think people would really, maybe on stuff like that, they would bat an eye to it if it was bad. But if it's their own stuff, you can just judge it on that merit. If it has all that's going to have on it is the Goosebumps name. The Goosebumps name is what sells. And you can't blame these creators for wanting to join the conglomerate because sometimes that's what you have to do. Like I said with the WWE comparison, if you want to make it in professional wrestling in North America, if you made it to WWE, you hit the height of really where you can go. That or AEW maybe, TNA, but like WWE is that top dog, right? And without WWE, I don't think North American wrestling would be where it is today, right? It wouldn't definitely not be the same. It would be a cataclysmic change in the industry. I think the same thing would happen with Goosebumps, except worse. I think kids horror needs it needs that monolith leading the charge. Without the brand recognition of Goosebumps having that 30+ year legacy to it and that fan base built into the IP, there's a lot of people out there who probably don't really recognize this, but they probably were fans of Goosebumps first before they were fans of R.L. Stine, right? Why did you start watching Goosebumps? Why did you start reading Goosebumps? Was it the covers? Was it the stories that hooked you? Was it your fandom of R.L. Stine? I highly doubt it was the third option first. I highly doubt it was that third option first. And because of that, I think that people can easily disassociate the franchise from that. You just got to remember, like, your fandom of the creator comes when you love the content. Nobody goes into a Ridley Scott movie and says, "Oh, I'm a Ridley Scott fan," but let's say they hate Alien or they hate all of the Alien movies or hate anything that he's ever made. Then how are you a Ridley Scott fan? You have to be a fan of the material first before you're a fan of the creator, right? So put pen to paper. If you claim that you're a fan of R.L. Stine, if you're a fan of Goosebumps too, tell me, do you keep up with Goosebumps? Do you read Goosebumps? Right? Let me ask you that. Do you keep up with it? How did it make you feel? Did you read the original 62? If you've done that, at the very least, I can understand you saying that you're a fan of R.L. Stine. But if you don't keep up with it, it's just hard to kind of make sense of your perspective on it. Like I get,
I'll add to that too. If you're a fan
yeah,
of R.L. Stine, are you reading Stein Tinglers? Are you reading Shark Night? Are you reading,
yeah,
Slime Doesn't Pay and everything that's outside of Goosebumps? Because if you love R.L. Stine, that means you love all of his writing. That means it's
mhm.
not just Goosebumps. That means you have to support him even outside of Goosebumps.
And we're not saying that you aren't out there. I know a lot of you out there are reading everything Stein. You are the unicorns. You are the 1% of the kids horror audience. I would say, like the diehard Stein heads. But that's just not enough to justify ending a series that basically is the bastion of an entire subgenre. Like I would never be able to forgive Scholastic or whomever would be in charge of Goosebumps after Stein inevitably retires or passes away, and they say, "Oh, we're just going to let it die," and then we have to slowly watch kids horror die, and hopefully within 30 years, by the time we're all gray in the hair, right, you will get that Black Mirror syndrome where Black Mirror brings back Twilight Zone type of storytelling from the dead because of people being let down after decades and decades and decades of not having quality Twilight Zone entertainment. And then finally, a new dog comes out and is able to come out because people gave up hope on Twilight Zone. That's what would need to happen. People would have to give up hope on Goosebumps for another thing to take it over. And I don't think we're at that point that we're ready to give up hope on Goosebumps, really, as a pop culture phenomenon. I don't think Sony's definitely not going to give it up anytime soon. They talked about that they want to keep it going for a third season or maybe do a shakeup or something new with it. They have no plans on letting up off the gas. I don't think Scholastic does either because they recognize it's the second best selling book series of all time, still, till this day. Is only ever been topped by Harry Potter. So, because of that notoriety, because of its pop culture relevance, even though it is kind of waning and it's hard to find it these days because Scholastic honestly does a crappy, shitty job at putting out promotional items and stuff for it that isn't I guess specialty market. Um, if they got a grip on that, maybe it would be a little more mainstream than it is now. But that should tell you that because of the sheer lack of Goosebumps merch out there, that Goosebumps already is leading a niche market, and brings me back to the point: without that lead, there is no kids horror. It's just it would be dead in the water. It really would. We'd be relegated to Amazon authors. And I don't think we want to see writers subjugate themselves to that when they can have a platform and an IP to work with to showcase their talent to a way bigger audience. And
Yeah,
that's the point of this video.
and just as a
Right.
concluding remark, I would say that the people who say that can Goosebumps books really survive on without Stein, well, have you let them? How are you going to say something when it hasn't happened? Maybe let it happen, and then you can speak on it. So some things I think you have to just wait till you experience it. You can't say this cannot happen, because I can tell you that there's plenty of things in your own personal life that you probably thought could never happen, and they happen for better or worse. So don't be closed minded, be open minded. And I think that Stein himself, loves the Goosebumps IP more than himself, and we should love the Goosebumps IP more than ourselves. Think about it at a bigger scale more than ourselves, and don't tie down Stein, because it's not what he would want. And that's
Mhm.
essentially, I think, what the main purpose of this video is.
Yeah. So, ultimate answer to the question, if you want to hear from us, should Arlstein's legacy with Goosebumps continue after he retires or passes away? We think yes. And I think we've offered plenty of examples and reasons why you should at least be open to this idea. If you're not still convinced after over an hour of us talking about this, then Godspeed to you. We respect your opinion, respectfully disagree, but we respect your opinion nonetheless. Um, Please, everybody, go support the Horrorlander. He's a great guy. I'm gonna put a link to his channel down in the comment section and the description of this video for you to go check out his wonderful content. He makes edited reviews, and they're honestly some of the most entertaining horror reviews you can find on YouTube. Go show him some support. I think he also has an Instagram. I will put in the link as well. I think he's been trying to promote that recently. I'll get that out there for you all. If you aren't subbed to me, feel free to drop a sub if you like. Drop a like on this video. Follow me on my Twitter account if you like. Stay tuned for whatever I decide to put out in the future, because I'm kind of winging it these days. But I had a lot of fun talking about Goosebumps, and I hope you guys enjoyed this long, thorough discussion about the touchy subject of R.L. Stine leaving Goosebumps, whether it's his decision or not. But yeah, let us know down in the comment section. Are there any points that you agreed with what we discussed in this video? Are there any points that you disagree with? Are there other points that you want to bring up that we failed to talk about that can be for our argument or against it? We want to keep the discussion going and keeping the community involved and feeling like we're an open forum again and not just closed-minded and you know walled off from each other because of they have a differing opinion or something like that.
Just be
So
respectful in the comments to each other.
just be respectful. That's all we ask, right? And that goes for all the people with the alt accounts out there trying to spam us with certain things. You know who you are out there. You might be watching. We see you. We don't unsee you.
And we
Just so
did
you
not
know.
mention Mr. Wood in this video until now,
We
so
did not,
please don't
Mr.
break it
Wood.
up.
So, do you have anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, it's always a pleasure. You are one of the pillars of Goosebumps. People have said it. It's true. I love talking about it with you. And I think this is one of the most important videos out there, one of the most important topics out there. And everyone who watched it, thank you so much for supporting. Thank you guys for supporting us over the years. And I definitely hope that I'm still 45 years old while Comp is, halfway with the bad hip, and me and him are still talking about Goosebumps, because the legacy continues on.
Yeah. My bad hip. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right,
My
y'all.
bad
Y'all.
back, your bad hip. There you go.
All right, y'all. Y'all have a good night out there. Stay spooky.
Deuces.